The UK government, yesterday we recorded the highest number of deaths reported in the previous 24 hours, and some of them lag back, we know, several days, weeks and so on. We know how the system works. But these are deaths with COVID as one of the factors in the death in the previous 28 days. We know right now we have the worst death rate in the world. We know that 1,600 people had their deaths recorded yesterday, in one day. The worst day of the pandemic.
And the thing that's so concerning is if the government... I mean, you weren't even necessarily asking the government to do an analysis of its failures, but if we cannot work out why we're losing so many people to COVID, how can we move on? I wonder if we should bring Dr. Hilary in on
Hilary, the obvious conclusion, isn't it, is that the reason they don't want to say is they may not know. And if they don't know, how can they stop this happening?
And a number of people responded yesterday with their own suggestions. I mean, I'd put a couple of questions to Brandon Lewis over whether, you know, was it the failure of test and trace? Was it the failure to support people to isolate? Was it the fact that we let it run riot in care homes? Was it because we didn't shut our borders? Do we have an issue about density of population?
Are these numbers we're now seeing the direct consequence of letting everybody meet up at Christmas?
Yeah, it was all of those things. We didn't lock down early enough. We didn't recognise the danger of this very transmissible virus. We had porous borders. We didn't organise test and trace. We handed that out to private firms who didn't really know what they were doing compared to the established NHS authorities who could have done a better job, I believe. We didn't lock down sufficiently and the virus got out of hand. And by the time it got out of hand and we were seeing large numbers of deaths in care homes and elsewhere, it was too late, really, for a test and trace system to be effective.
Hilary, here's the problem.
There have been many failures.
We're now seeing exactly the same thing all over again. We're now seeing another epidemic ripping through care homes. We're seeing another situation where we appear to have locked down way too late and in many people, in the public's estimation, not hard enough once this new variant was revealed. We're seeing the same mistakes being made, and this is why I want to know from the government, and we'll ask Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, this. I want to know their explanation for this, because it seems like we have sleptwalked right back into another nightmare.
I totally agree with you. I think Christmas was you know, we said on this show that we thought that the laxity of the arrangements around Christmas and New Year were far too dangerous. And here we are, we're reaping the harvest, if you like, of the social gathering that went on then. And we're seeing the hospitalisations increase to record levels of deaths as well, and new variants. So we actually have to take this far more seriously than we have been taking it. And unless we lock down really stringently, we're going to be, you know...
I went for a walk yesterday, Hilary. There were so many more people out than in the first proper lockdown, the one back in March, April. So many more cars on the road, so many more businesses open. And I'm sure there are logical reasons that everybody had. I'm not passing judgment on individuals who were in the cars or walking. I'm just observing...
You were one of them.
Well, yeah, I'm just observing, as I think we all are, this lockdown feels and is very different to the first one. And that with these numbers, seems to me to be a real problem. There are just too many people circulating with each other.
Absolutely, and I've witnessed exactly the same thing. And I do think that the more I look at it, the more I observe, I think that so many people have been walled off in their own little bubble. We're subjected to entertainment and films, and we live in this fantasy world where everybody else does things. The world we live in is controlled by a few people who know what they're doing. And we just carry on with our lives, but we don't really understand science anymore. We don't understand the germ theory of disease. If you talk to older people, certainly older white populations, 96% of them are signing up for vaccination because they lived through an era where vaccinations saved millions of lives. If you look at younger populations, if you look at BAME communities who are subjected to all sorts of online, unverified myths and scaremongering stories about vaccinations and who aren't represented really in scientific communities sufficiently, what we see is them saying we actually 72% of them say they might not have the vaccine.
I mean,
this is extraordinary. This protects them, the most vulnerable group.
Yeah.
It protects them, and we've got to have a much better educational system in where people understand how vaccination works and why it protects lives.
Well, and there's an interesting report because, of course, Israel is way ahead of anybody. anybody in giving this vaccination. And, of course, they have pledged to share the information they're getting and the results that they're getting with Pfizer and the rest of the world. It's a sort of medical study, really, isn't it? And in the Telegraph today, we read that Israel's coronavirus czar has warned that the first dose of the Pfizer vaccine offers less protection than expected. He said many Israelis had caught COVID in between the first and second doses of the vaccine, suggesting that the first jab was less effective than we thought. It comes after 2 studies by Israeli healthcare providers found that the first dose of the vaccine, it does reduce the risk of infection, but by around 30 and 60%, respectively. Now, it's fantastic. Of course, we are very pleased that it reduces the rate of infection. But, Dr. Hilary, I thought we were told by the Deputy Chief Medical Officer that we had 89% protection after the first dose.
OK, this is quite complex to explain, but if you look at the Pfizer data, which is the only published peer-reviewed data, if you look at that data, then they suggested that you get a level of immunity about 52%, pretty quickly within the first few days of the first vaccination, and then the JVCI, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, extrapolated on a graph and formed a model and said it was 89% by 3 weeks. So that's why they decided to delay the second vaccination dose. Now, the Israeli...
Hilary, just to clarify, is that immunity from catching the virus, or is that immunity from getting seriously ill with the virus?
No, it's from catching it, and the hospitalisations were reduced. It's almost 100% protection against serious disease and hospitalisations, which is really good. And the same with the AstraZeneca vaccine.
But if you've had only one of the Pfizer doses now, and you're looking at this Israel report, and they're top scientists in Israel, and we don't want to create unnecessary concern about this. But there is a legitimate reason to be concerned. I mean, people have already been concerned. We know Jeff Boycott and others, Joan Bakewell came on here and talked about the same, who've had that first dose, worried. We were told we had to have the second within 3 weeks. We all agree, don't we, Hilary? If you have the second one, you then move to that, that utopia of 94%.
So here we go, another study of 100 people in Israel found that 98% were protected from the disease after the second dose.
So there is a big difference.
Well, we know that the booster dose boosts the antibody levels, and that study suggests that it boosts them considerably, and is a very good thing to have. Obviously, everybody should have a second jab of the same vaccine down the line. Now, Israel's in a different position to the UK. We have a bigger population, and we have hospitals that are chock-a-block right now. So a decision had to be made. Do we give a few people the second jab and give them tip-top immunity, or do we roll this out, delay the second dose and give far more people
But if you think you're only getting, Hilary, 50%...
So immunologists are disagreeing on this.
Yeah. But say you get the 50% in your head, right? You're not going to leave your house with just 50% protection, are you?
Well,
nobody should be leaving their house after the vaccination, because you're not protected for up to 3 weeks at all.
And this is an irony, of course, because according to Professor David Halpern, the chair of the Behavioural Insights team, he said vaccinated people mistakenly believe they are good to go and socialise after a first vaccination.
There are some people who are saying, I'm vaccinated, I'm fine now. They're not, because it takes a good few days or even weeks for your antibodies to be produced after the vaccination. That is how vaccination works, and that is why I'm saying that people don't understand science anymore, or a vast number of people don't understand science. Antibodies are produced by cells in your body after your vaccination, but it takes time. So you're certainly not safe to go out and about without going by the usual rules. And also, we don't even know whether, when your antibodies are high, whether you can still transmit the virus to other people.
There's too many
unanswerables. So until then, we need to be really careful.
The problem with all this, Hilary, is that I think people reached the end of the year, last year, with a bit of hope in their hearts. We came out of that sort of semi-lockdown in November. Things were relaxed. It looked like everyone was allowed to go back for Christmas, all this kind of stuff. They were sort of springing people's steps, thinking, well, the new year, the vaccines are here, the cavalry's here. Boris Johnson kept talking in that kind of military language. We've come over the hill. We had JVT with these train analogies. And now it feels like everything's hit the buffers.
Especially because the vaccine rollout, Dr. Hilary, started to slow down. We're actually not maintaining that.
But we don't have the jabs, do we? Let's spell this out. Pfizer have now said, haven't they, from their Belgium factory is being sort of renovated or something, revamped, whatever they're doing to it. As a result, they have slowed down the supply of the vaccine. And they're hoping to massively increase it from the middle of February. But that's going to impact this government's ability to hit their targets if we simply don't have the jabs. It seems like we have the system, but we don't have the jabs.
It's very strange, isn't it, that we've gone through so many highs and lows, so many hopes raised and then hopes dashed. When we got the news that the Pfizer vaccine was available and hundreds of thousands of doses for the whole world was going to be provided, and then suddenly a factory is going to be renovated.
I know.
And people don't get their heads around that. Why is it being renovated? It's not for redecoration. Presumably it's to expand capacity.
Yeah.
But they must have known this. They must have known that whilst promising millions of doses, they couldn't provide them.
I think there is a problem with supply, and I think we need to get to Priti Patel later needs to spell out exactly what is going on. Because, look, that's not what we want to see. You know, all that hope over those first few early stages of the vaccine programme, and then suddenly it's all going downhill again. And the reason, I believe, is the supply chain from this Belgium factory, which has now got to be in some way revamped. I hope Priti Patel knows what's going on in that factory, because lives, as we can see from our death numbers, are literally dependent on that answer.
We were told that there were 21 million doses on British soil last week. So if that's the case, we've got plenty of supply there to be distributed.
So why are the numbers going down?
And I know a lot of this is being redistributed to areas where, you know, remote areas, more rural areas, and people where we've got care homes that haven't yet been vaccinated. So we are changing the supply lines to make sure that there is even distribution around the country, which is a good thing. So I think this will...
But I heard a story yesterday...
people there to do the jabs.
OK, but I heard a story yesterday about a 93-year-old lady down in West Sussex who still hasn't had the vaccination. And when her family spoke to the surgery, they were told it may be a few weeks. She's 93.
Is she able to get to a vaccine hub, or is that because she's waiting to get the jab at home? Because that's one of the reasons that some are delayed, isn't it?
Well, this was speaking to the surgery, so I assume she can go to the surgery. But
well,
there are anomalies here all over the country, and look, there are going to be. I don't want to be too censorious. The real concern to me is what is going on with that supply chain, because we should not be seeing at this stage of the programme day after day of numbers now going down. Well, look, we'll ask Priti Patel and see if she has the answers. Thanks, Hilary. We'll come back to you a bit later.